Our panelist of the day, as I introduce our new entrant, Kassim Tandaza, who's joining us from Mombasa. He's a member of parliament for Matuga constituency. Earlier on, I acknowledged Professor Gitile Naituli, a former NCIC commissioner. I'm also joined by Michael Agwanda, who's a governance expert, as well as Gloria Roba, who's in studio. She's a youth policy analyst. Allow me to begin with you, Michael Agwanda. Perhaps from a governance expert's position, what is your reaction to the by-election that have just concluded across the country? Of course, Matungu vote counting is still ongoing, but your quick reaction, sir.
Good morning, and it's a good day to see our by-elections come to an end. Unfortunately for this country, we are seeing something that perhaps we thought that the handshake could have shielded us from in our political circles of violence during electioneering time. I wake up very sorry for this country that brothers and sisters will fight at the polling station where we are supposed to have a peaceful voting, that tear gas canisters will be thrown at voters, and that people will be found literally with something resembling money to lure voters to vote for their candidates, even though the campaign time was already over. I have one thing to say, however. So long as IBC that bundled the presidential election in 2017 and that was cited for anomalies in the electoral process of 2017 is still running the election in this country, we're going to have a huge problem. If IBC trust is not regained by reform, then this kind of narrative that we must protect our vote, we must make sure that our votes are counted, we must make sure that we see the roaming agents' attitude must stop for a peaceful electioneering period in this country. And it's unfortunate that every 5 years, people move from one town to the other in fear of violence. If this is what is a pointer to 2022, unfortunately, we may not have a very peaceful election. But now, as I conclude on this matter, there is a new kid in the block, and that new kid is UDA. The viciousness, the aggressiveness, the presence and the words that are not encouraging but are vilifying and are really putting everybody into bad light is probably what is going to cause our election process in 2022 go through the drain. I agree with the words of Moses Kuria. If Jubilee is not looked into very keenly in how they want to approach the elections, if UDA is not looked into very keenly on how they want to approach the election in 2022, we are in for a rude shock and this country might go to dogs.
Well, that's interesting. Many might argue ODM might also fall in that category as well, bearing in mind the pockets of violence where the candidate was also fronted. But be that as it may, I'd like to cross over to Mombasa right now, obviously joined by Kassim Tandaza. A good day for the ANC party. It seems you're leading as it is in the Matungu by-election. Your candidate definitely increasing the gap between him and the second-placed ODM candidates. What's your quick reaction to this? Because we just had the deputy party leader mention that there might be celebrations in Kakamega County. Will this be replicated in Mombasa, I wonder?
Good morning, Rogers. Good morning, viewers. I'm very elated. It's not a surprise that it has come. It's not that we are leading, we are only waiting for the official announcement. Otherwise, the results are all over from the polling stations, and we know we won this thing flat and square, which we deserve to do. So it is our time to celebrate. Of course, remember, this was already our seat from the beginning. It was an ANC seat. But it was not also guaranteed automatically that we would get it. So much could have happened between 2017 and now 2021 for this by-election. But for sure, we ran a good campaign. Our party leader is very respected, not only in Western, but we know nationally. He's very visionary. And I think going forward, it's not just about the by-election, but even as we approach the general election, it's high time that people really focused on our party leader, His Excellency Musalia Mudavadi, in terms of what he can offer this country, the kind of a leadership. And this automatically translates also to the candidates that he normally picks, that he would pick also visionary leaders, would pick people who are ready to work for the ordinary mwananchi, especially on the economic aspect, which has been pointing over and over again, and which everybody agrees is a problem. So, well, celebrations will be everywhere, but the main celebration, I think, as we had initially indicated, is coming towards 2022.
That's interesting. We definitely anticipate the celebrations, even as these by-elections were touted by many to be a measure of the political parties and the leaders' strength ahead of next year's election. So we understand you touting for the ANC party leader, but it was not all smiles. Definitely, it was a dark day for democracy, even as we saw pockets of arrest, bribery allegations, and confrontations around the country. Of course, this has been highlighted by the Standard and the Daily Nation. Chaos, arrests, and bribery in mini polls. Professor Gitile Naituli, from where you sit, having seen the newspaper headlines and being so close to the 2022 general election, perhaps talk to us from a former commissioner's perspective. What do you make of these pockets of violence that we saw?
Yes, congratulations, Tandasa and the ANC for reclaiming your seat. I think the trend is not very nice. The trend, electoral process is not inspiring. We created a climate through the 2010 constitution where we want to trust our institutions to deliver us in elections and to deliver peace in that process. So the tussle, the pull and the push that we saw was very high. It was not necessary. The politicians are still treating elections as a matter of life and death for them. They are forgetting that we need to have a peaceful country. I think they need to cool down. They need to realize that we need a peaceful Kenya. But also, we as a country, we have made a huge mistake here by shifting all resources to the political process. And now, that's what I mean is usually people look at the returns to labor in order to figure out where to employ their skills. So you realize now that when we train the best doctor wants to be a politician because that's where we have put the money. We train the best engineer, that engineer wants to be a politician because that's where we have put the money. The candidates themselves, either for parliamentary seats, ward seats, or even for president, this thing is going to be a matter of life and death because it's not about public service. It's about access to corruption, access to national resources for you and those who support you. So this is going to make our politics not competitive in a positive sense, but competitive in a very negative sense. So as a country, we need to roam back. We need to begin to reduce the attraction to national political office. Remember, the political process is not a productive sector of the economy. It's a consumer of resources. But that's where we have concentrated on benefits. So what you are seeing here is unless we really, the SRC gets serious, the national government gets serious, we are looking at a very interesting 2022.
Okay, well, it definitely, on the bigger picture, just as one of our panelists mentioned, the trust in our electoral institutions is definitely key. Allow me to bring in Gloria Oroba, as you give us your take or your quick reaction to the scenes that characterized yesterday during the by-elections, are we reading too much into it when we talk about the low voter turnout? Keen to note, especially in Nakuru, 24.7% is the voter turnout during that particular by-election, even though it was for the ward representatives. Talk to us about this.
Thank you, Jesse, for having me this morning. I want to say that voter apathy is one of the things that we should really pay attention to going forward. Why is it that people are actually not coming out to, to vote? When you look at the headlines on the newspapers today about, the illegal detention of certain elected members, of how there was abuse of police force during these by-elections, and all these other situations that have been characterized in the polling stations during these by-elections, then you understand why there is a voter apathy. I think one of the reasons that we definitely have to have a conversation on the transparency and the electoral process that we have in Kenya is because if this is what we are looking at, this is actually a reflection, if not of what is coming in 2022, it's probably going to be worse. Because as you know, a lot of Kenyans actually don't have that trust and that they actually don't trust at the IEBC. We have seen cases where, even in these by-elections, where IEBC seems to appear biased in terms of maybe situations around the agents who've been chosen into, the agents being barred into the polling station, and yet they have been cleared by IEBC. We've seen the interference of activities at the polling station by police officers, and yet IEBC has not spoken against it or, given us a statement as to why this is the case. Remember, the mandate of IEBC is to run the elections and provide oversight, meaning that if there's any interference from, independent agencies or any other person that is not IEBC during the process, they have to either give us a statement, stop it, or, they have the tools and the machinery to deal with that kind of a situation. Yeah. So when I look at, for me, I think the by-elections, as much as the political parties were using it as a litmus test for whatever reason, like in Matungu and Kabuchai, it was really about emphasizing who's the kingpin leader in that region. In the other areas, for instance, in Kisii, where we had the Kiamokama by-election, it really was about understanding the party politics down on the region. We have seen that ODM, through their candidate Matara, although it has not been announced, seems to be taking the lead, and we have seen that the UDA candidates came forth. So I don't think in Kisii that speaks really much about it. What we saw in Kisii was that we had a flawed process. We had a lot of voter intimidation. Prior to that by-election, there was a lot of unrest in Kisii. Remember, way back from Nyachai's funeral service. So I think, really, the lessons that we need to learn from this by-election is going forward. How are we going to deal with the fact that our independent electoral board is not really independent? How are we going to address the issue of the process of how we handle agents at the polling station? Because that was a really big issue that brought about a lot of violence at the polling station. How are we going to address the voter apathy in terms of understanding why are voters not coming out? Is it because they are being harassed? Is it because there's too much force by the police at the station? And I think also the most important one that I've seen a lot of political parties dealing with is they have now understood in order for you to guard the vote, your agents actually have to be as strong and as equipped, and that is the reason most of them are opting to go with elected leaders.
This is interesting. You brought up the fact about elected leaders being agents. Michael Agwanda, I'd like to engage you on this, even as you perhaps add your voice on the poor voter turnout, even though it characterizes this by-elections that are held, that are usually not held within the electoral years. But be that as it may, we have a couple of elected leaders who spent the night in police custody. They were serving as agents. 4 of them, Cheragei, Didmas Baraza, Wilson Kogo, and Nelson Koech. Your quick reaction to this: members of parliament perhaps acting as agents. Is it within their right? Are we reading too much into it? What do you think?
I strongly believe that there is a problem. The problem that is in the polling station is we are starting to have a situation basically where the police seem to be managing the electoral processes within the polling station vis-a-vis the fact and the reality that the returning officer of a polling station is the one with the power and the resting authority. That the police officers are working under the returning officer. That's a law within the electoral process and within the polling station. I don't remember seeing a returning officer, for example, telling an OCS that arrest such a politician because he's causing chaos within the polling station. I see the politicians being arrested either on the way to the polling station or perhaps before they get to the polling station. I have a problem with that because that in itself is not a polling station. And if these men and women that perhaps were representing their party would want to walk and see whether election is taking place properly, they should be allowed. This is a free country where anybody can walk in any polling station. If he talks to the returning officer or the in charge of the polling station and says, I want to see how the process is going on, they should be allowed. If there is no, perhaps a crowd that will prevent them from getting in, or if there is no surge of people that perhaps their presence will create, commotion, they should be allowed. The idea of them being arrested on their way or just before, to me, is sinister in its, in the wildest term possible. I strongly believe that arresting these people without finding a legitimate reason to arrest them is not right for the democracy of this country. Politicians, I believe, have an interest, and I believe they were sent there by their parties to monitor what is happening. They should be allowed, in the name of transparency, to see that everything is running as it's supposed to. However, if they are found to be either bribing voters or influencing in certain ways, or with weapons that perhaps were being indicated that some of them were having, that would be a reason enough to arrest them. But as far as we are concerned, then no one has been charged to that extent. And by holding them in the police cells, we will see what will come out today, whether they will be taken to court or not. But I really think arresting people because they've come to monitor an election is not right. And that should only be an order of IBC returning officer saying this man needs to be arrested, and the reason for his arrest cited as an electoral violence, and so that's what you charge him with. I will see a number of those members of parliament for sure walk out of those places. And I don't think the police need to intimidate the electorates. They don't need to intimidate the officials of the party. It needs to be a free place. But again, what I saw is not necessarily instigated by the voters, but it was instigated by politicians who are going after one another. We cannot allow politicians to go, after the throat of the other politicians, either because you come from another region or because you're not a voter there. I don't think the politicians need to be the policemen of the polling station. That is the work of IBC. And I say again, if we do not have the trust in the process of our election in this country being handled by the IBC commissioners and officials, then we better restructure and rebrand the IBC so that Kenyans can have faith in them. If not, we are going to have more and worse in 2022. Why do I say this? I say this because BBI is going to be passed. We will have 70 more members of parliament. And if you have 70 more members of parliament than what we have today going for an election, I guarantee you it will be 70 more harsh scenes like what we've just seen in the last day here. And so I strongly believe we need to have a civic society go out there and educate the electorates And the police must be trained again so that they know that their job is not to arrest people, but under the order of IBC. We also need to know that it is not fair to howl tear gas and to throw tear gas at people. And I saw, a member of Parliament of Langata, kicking back, a canister, a tear gas canister, back to the police. So it's telling you that I can manage this situation here. And what about if now the electorates also decide to do that? My fear is when we think we are just getting it right in our electoral process, we seem to be having 10 steps behind, unfortunately. I do not believe that UDA should think that they have a right for every place and they can make noise to a point where they will literally be on the face of everybody and every polling station. It's a small party that has just come up. I don't think it is right for a president to have a party which is called Jubilee and the deputy president to have a UDA party and they go after one another. And this is perhaps why this election or by-election was hugely polarized, because you're having a deputy president as well as the president party and the other parties now fighting. And as I conclude, the idea that a money national party, the idea that Orange Democratic Party, the idea that Wiper Party is all working with the government is even making it more worse. Because at one point you're wondering who is the government with in these political parties that are fronting their candidates. Is it with the money? Is it with the ODM? Is it with UDA? Is it with Wiper? And so it's making it very convoluted. I know that the people and the electorates wanted to get out and vote. But they cannot vote when they know that there are gunfires out there, when they know that they are policemen, and the presence of policemen seem to be more than the voters in a polling station, unfortunately.
Well, those are interesting sentiments right there. Many thanks, Michael Agwanda. We'll definitely continue deliberating on this. Let me bring in the Member of Parliament in the panel. Of course, a lot has been mentioned about whatever has happened in the various by-election, but I want to focus a little bit on what we saw in Nakuru County in the London Ward representative election. Of course, UDA emerged winners with Jubilee Party following. We well know of the historical importance which Nakuru brings onto the political table, especially to the duo Uhuru Ruto, where perhaps a lot happened in Nakuru County in the run-up to them fronting themselves as candidates. Talk to us about this. Are we reading too much into it? What do you make of the win by UDA Party in this particular by-election?
Thank you, Rogers. One, I would want to comment on what Agwanda has just said in terms of my party, ANC, that we are in government. I think that has to be clear that we are agreeing on matters BBI, as it were, but on the other issues, we don't have any coalition or cohabitation or any other form of agreement with the current government. We are on our own and focused on what we want to achieve come 2022. About the UDA and Jubilee that is in London Ward, yes, it was a fight, basically we have to admit, between the president and his deputy in terms of their parties. It is unfortunate, and I'm saying unfortunate in the sense that it seems the state organs, the state agencies which are supposed to be custodians of political parties and maintain law and order have totally failed. And for this matter, it should be the registrar of political parties. Earlier on, I had Honorable Moses Kuria being introduced as the party leader of People's Empowerment Party, and yet he's in parliament in Jubilee. This can't happen in the current constitution. In the land, the laws of this land does not allow that. But there it is, it goes on, and many other things are going to happen. This then precipitates what we are seeing, that there is no order at all. There is no loyalty at all. And this is against the Political Parties Act. It also shows one thing about the London Ward, that still, as we go forward, instead of going for ideologies which we always propagate as leaders or as any good citizenry, we are again back to our following depending on who the party leader is. So even in these by-elections, we'll find that where the deputy party leader, the deputy president, for this matter, in the London Ward, is strong on the ground, then automatically the party wins. So it's not about the ideology, but it's about where the people, the majority of the people are following. This essentially should not be the case. We are looking at a situation whereby possibly at one point we'll be looking at ideologies and even the leaders. When we go too much in the political parties, and especially the leaders of those political parties, then sometimes we end up electing leaders who actually are not beneficial to the people, but because we are saying they were in the right party. To me, that is also not the right thing to do. The electorate should be electing leaders based on their capabilities, and if it is a party, then based on the manifesto, the ideals of that party, not because we want to show somebody else that we don't like this person, so we have to show him. And I think that is what has happened in the London Ward. But said as it is, we are hoping that at one point the state agencies, the registrar of the political parties, and also the IBC, who are basically the guardians of the Elections Act also, and the police should be actually following the rules. And that is the only way we are even going to stem the violence. Because as we've seen, even where it happened earlier on in other by-elections, somebody being assaulted, it goes to court and nothing happens. That means there is not deterrent. And we've seen it happen again. And that is why some of us leaders are saying it's worrying going to 2022. It might happen because even after it happens, no tangible action is taken by the police. And even when the police take it to the court, of course, the monster comes back, maybe through corruption, somebody manages to get his way out. And this doesn't help this country.
Definitely 5 steps forward, 10 steps backwards, as many might argue. But be that as it may, it's also keen to note that the Nakuru by-election was definitely instrumental in the ejection of various party officials from the Jubilee Party. That being said, let's cross over to Professor. Briefly, the involvement of the police. Michael Lagwanda mentioned something very interesting, where we might have a case of police being as many as the voters within that particular polling station. Talk to us about this, because we had a couple of allegations being thrown, especially in Nakuru, where we had a couple of members of parliament accusing the police officers of showing favoritism and allowing its officials to openly bribe and intimidate voters. We well know of the Elections Act and how it's all structured, but implementation at times is an issue, especially within the polling station. What's your take on this?
First, let me say that the importance of Nakuru to the country and why peace in Nakuru also means peace in Kenya is because it's one of the most cosmopolitan counties in the Republic. There are those counties like Busia, Nakuru, Isiolo, Nairobi, Mombasa. So if you want a barometer, Migori also is one of these counties. Kajiado, of course, Narok. So if you want a barometer on how peaceful we can be, we need to measure on activities of those counties. So the only one now which is in our purview is Nakuru. I want also to disagree that it's okay for the president to have a party, and it's okay for his deputy also to have a party, and it's completely fine for them, for those parties to compete. What we need to have is a trust in our institutions, is a trust in the police to be impartial in implementing the law. It's a trust with the IBC to be able to implement its laws and manage elections peaceably. This trust is what is now being eroded by what we are witnessing. Now, the erosion of that trust, it becomes dangerous because instead of parties selling their ideology, selling their manifesto, they now become grievance parties. Once the parties converse to grievance, those grievances are now transported to their supporters. When that happens, it becomes a chain reaction, and they may not be able to be controlled. Like you see, the London ward in Nakuru was a small place. You have to imagine that rank now across the country, and you realize that we could be facing serious problems. So what do we need to do? What we need to do is to let the politicians play their politics as long as they are within the law, and the police to be completely impartial, because that's in fact the police force by its nature is about to be impartial, so that we trust them. When they act to prevent a crime from taking place, we trust them. When they apprehend the criminals, we trust them. We know they are doing the right thing. But the moment there is a perception that the police is partial or being deployed in political contest, then the country breaks down. Because the police force or the police service is the glue which knits us together as a country. So it is our leaders who need to realize that they need to lead us to peaceful Kenya, but not lead us to 207. Because when we start like this, we will continue building grievances, and those grievances will explode in 2022. We don't want that to happen, so we are asking our institutions, which we have created to serve us, to maintain their neutrality and to execute their mandate according to the law. Because, we say they are independent in executing their mandate. Of course, the independent doesn't mean that you don't collaborate, you don't refer to other institutions. It does not mean that you don't refer also to senior government officials. You should refer to them. But the decisions that you take should be informed by the law. They cannot be informed by extraneous issues extraneous to the law. So this is what we need to understand. And there is a reason to want to lower the political temperatures at this stage. There is nothing to celebrate about all these by-elections the way it has happened. The idea that this party cannot be allowed to win here, or this party cannot be allowed to win here, that idea we need to banish.
Okay.
Because, yes.
All right, well said, Professor. Definitely independence and impartiality of these institutions is core, and we'll definitely focus on that. Allow us to take a short break. I'm still joined by a panelist, as you can see, Gloria Roba in studio, Michael Agwanda joining us from Kisumu, Professor Gitile Naituli, as well as Kasim Tandaza, are part of the heads we'll be using to deliberate on this particular issues and much more. Of course, we continue focusing on the latest developments in the by-election, as earlier hinted. We'll be back after this short break, speaking to our reporter Patrick Amimo on the latest in terms of any developments in the Matungu constituency by-election, even as vote counting is still ongoing. Do stay with Morning Express.